By the 1960s, the golden age of air travel was in full swing. But for every passenger seeking adventure or relaxation, there was someone else, someone who saw the skies as a way to escape justice or push a dangerous agenda. It was the early 1960s when the world faced the 9th plane hijacking in history. This time aboard Eastern Airlines Flight 375, a routine journey that turned into a heart-pounding fight for survival. A flight crew caught between a hijacker's demands and a looming threat of violence, a dangerous game of cat and mouse at 25,000 feet. This is the true story of Eastern Airlines Flight 375, the world's 9th hijacking, a tale of crime, desperation and terror above the clouds. On the evening of November 1st, 1961, Eastern Airlines Flight 375 was scheduled to fly from Miami to Mexico City, a common route for the airline. The passengers were a mix of business people, tourists and families looking for a getaway. The plane? A Lockheed L-188 Electra, state-of-the-art for its time. But among the passengers, one man stood apart. Roberto Garcia Diaz, a Cuban revolutionary with a dark plan to hijack the plane and force its landing in Cuba. In the chaos of the Cuban Revolution, the island was a hotbed for those looking to escape or support the growing rebel movement. Roberto was no ordinary passenger. His mind raced with thoughts of revolution, of joining the fight in Cuba, but he needed a way to get there. A plane hijacking was his only way in. As the plane ascended into the darkening sky, Roberto waited patiently, carefully watching the flight attendants, the pilots, and the other passengers. He knew the timing had to be perfect. The flight crew was on high alert in those days. Air piracy was becoming a rising threat in the industry. One wrong move, and his plan could end in disaster. At 30 minutes into the flight, when the cabin had settled into a calm rhythm, Roberto made his move.
Take me to the cockpit, now.
With a concealed pistol in hand, Roberto strode down the aisle and approached the flight attendant at the front of the plane. His face cold, his words sharp. The passengers, oblivious to the unfolding danger, continued their conversations, unaware that in just moments their flight was about to be thrown into chaos. Once inside the cockpit, Roberto didn't waste any time. He demanded that the pilots divert the flight to Havana, Cuba. He told them they had no choice, and if they didn't comply, he would start shooting.
Fly to Havana, or I kill everyone on this plane.
The pilots exchanged nervous glances. They knew they didn't have enough fuel to make it to Havana directly. The tension was thick, and time was running out. Captain Simmons remained calm, knowing they couldn't make it to Havana without refueling first. But with a gun pointed at his head, he had to think fast. He told Roberto they would need to make an emergency stop in New Orleans for refueling. Roberto agreed, but only under the condition that no one try to alert authorities on the ground. The pilots nodded, but secretly they were already formulating a plan. They knew they had to alert the ground crew at New Orleans about the hijacker on board without tipping him off. As they descended into New Orleans, Captain Simmons quietly radioed the tower, using a secret hijack code that alerted air traffic control to the crisis on board without saying it outright. Ground crews scrambled to prepare for the emergency while authorities rushed to the airport. Roberto had no idea what awaited him on the ground. As far as he knew, the pilots were simply complying with his demands. But as the plane touched down in New Orleans, the tension inside the cabin reached its boiling point. Roberto's nerves were fraying. He could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles in the distance. His grip on the gun tightened, his threats growing more erratic. The pilots tried to calm him, insisting they needed to refuel before continuing to Havana. But Roberto wasn't buying it. Roberto Garcia Diaz shouting, "No tricks! We take off now or I shoot!" But just as Roberto was about to make his next move, the ground crew sprang into action. A carefully planned maneuver unfolded. SWAT teams stormed the tarmac, closing in on the plane. One of the ground staff, under the guise of refueling, managed to slip a message to the pilots. "Hold tight, help is coming." The moment came without warning. SWAT teams burst through the cockpit door, guns drawn. Roberto spun around, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, one of the agents tackled him to the ground, disarming him in a swift, calculated move. In a matter of seconds, it was over. Roberto Garcia Diaz was subdued and arrested. His plan to hijack the plane and fly to Cuba thwarted by the quick thinking of the pilots and the precision of the SWAT team. Roberto Garcia Diaz was sentenced to life in prison for his attempted hijacking of Eastern Airlines Flight 375. His crime sent shockwaves through the aviation industry, sparking debates about airport security and the rising threat of air piracy. But thanks to the courage of the flight crew and the swift actions of law enforcement, no lives were lost that night. The passengers of Flight 375 walked away from a nightmare in the skies, one that could have ended in tragedy. The hijacking of Eastern Airlines Flight 375 would go down in history as the world's 9th hijacking, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the skies. But it also stands as a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to let terror win. The hijacking of Eastern Airlines Flight 375 was a chilling reminder of the unpredictability of air travel, but it also highlighted the strength of those who stand against fear and chaos. The world's 9th plane hijacking ended not in disaster, but with the hijacker brought to justice thanks to quick thinking, bravery, and a relentless determination to keep the skies safe. This is the story of the world's 9th hijacking, a desperate man's attempt to control the skies and the heroes who stopped him.